welcome back to Lex Dei. So my name is Martha, and in this episode, we'll try to deep dive into some of our questions about what's rarely spoken in our generations, things that are current social and political issues. And we really aim to present Lex, which actually means law, or the constitution of man, side by side with Dei, which means God or the law of God, and really see if we can these two things merge together? Is there a middle ground, so to speak? So today, we have with us again a human rights lawyer and faculty member of 3 law schools, Atty. Ted, as well as a theologian, Raoul Roncal. Welcome again to our conversation, and join us as we take a look through the lenses of Lex and Dei. All right, so thanks for listening to episode 1. We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as the 3 of us did. And we're back again with episode 2. And I just wanted to give a short recap about the very meaningful discussion that we had last episode. So one thing that really struck me was that separation of church and state isn't about how the church cannot interfere with the government, but it's actually the opposite. This is what Ed mentioned, that it's about how the government cannot interfere with church affairs or cannot mandate what the church can or can't do. We also talked about how when the church gives advice, or for example, if they're asked to speak on the media about certain topics, it's really guiding its members to know how to best act based on the teachings of the church and what is ethical and what is moral. To really guide us in terms of our conscience, and so that we can make the most sound decision that we can make as part of the church. Raoul also mentioned that in the church does not really mean that the church just involves the leaders of the church, like the priests and the bishops, but it actually involves everybody. So it involves each one of us as members of the church. And lastly, this for me was, I guess you'd say, the turning point for all of us in church. In Pope Francis's homily, one of his homilies, Raoul shared that the Pope said, "Good Catholics meddle in politics, offering the best of themselves so that those who can govern can govern." And it's really a call for us to talk about these things. And that's really why we're here today, again, for episode 2, to continue the discussion that we had about separation of church and state.
That's a great summary, Martha, and very great and accurate summary. And for those who missed our pilot episode, and if you wanted to listen to the entire episode, you can still check out episode 1 on our page. And we hope that through the conversation that we will be having in this podcast, we will be able to know the law of man, the Lex, as Martha said, which is the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress, and the Dei, or the law of God, or the teachings of the church, in the hope that we may all be more informed when we make choices, when we talk about things, when we teach, for example, about issues or concerns that we hear about on media or on social media. And when we make our stand on different social issues, we may be more informed about both the law of man and the law of God, and points of divergence or convergence.
And last episode, I really enjoyed my conversation with you, Martha, and then Ted. And what brings us together is we're part of a prayer group called Ligayan ng Panginoon Community. And so here we are again, hopefully to continue our conversation.
Right, so let's just jump right back into where we left off, actually. You left us there with a hanger, another controversial bit, Ted, when you mentioned that actually there's a prayer that you say before you officially start in court, right? So then that begs again the discussion, what about separation of church and state? So maybe you can talk a little bit about that again, and for those that are tuning back into our second episode, they can get a quick recap.
Yeah, there's this prayer that all courts, particularly the trial courts, use at the start of every session. And it's called the Centennial Prayer for the Courts. And it was commissioned, it was written during the centennial year of the judiciary or the Supreme Court of the Philippines. And so it became a requirement for all judges to recite this prayer before they start the session. And if you're a lawyer, you're appearing in that court, you're already in the courtroom before the judge comes out, you're a party to the case, you're an accused or you're a complainant. Once the judge enters, the process is you have to stand to show respect for the judge. And so because there's this requirement, the judge then will either lead the prayer himself or herself or will ask one of the staff to lead the prayer. And so everyone's basically supposed to be there to stand for the prayer. But of course, there are people who don't like it because, one, they don't agree with it, praying in courts. For example, they say, I'm a non-believer, so why should I be forced to pray, right? And so again, the issue would be raised. Is it a violation of the separation of church and state? Because for a non-believer, you are being required to pray, right? So again, the essence of this would be, is there freedom? If you're a non-believer, is there freedom to not pray? And so, the advice I usually give to people who say, can I avoid that prayer? Well, one of the things is to say, you can simply stand as a gesture of respect for the judge, but you can opt not to pray out loud, or just keep quiet. And so that's the part that gets tricky, because they will say, well, I am being forced nonetheless to say that prayer.
Oh, that's challenging, Ted. Let me complicate it a bit, huh? So you're saying that, of course, that's out of respect. You can say it silently, but isn't it the case that the Constitution, it has this starting point? May kodigo ko rito. I'll just read it. I think this is probably part of the preamble. We are a sovereign Filipino people imploring the aid of the Almighty God. In our Constitution, there's a prayer. Now, that adds to the complication of this issue, because it seems to presume that all Filipinos believe in God. So, praying is like part of our life. So, it's challenging siya, di ba? It's a challenging, and are we the only country that has a constitution like this? I'm not sure, but it seems that that's an important thing to bring in. I'm understanding your explanation, but isn't that also complicates the whole issue of prayer and the belief in God as part of who we are as Filipinos? Ganyan.
Let me complicate it further, Raoul and Martha. Yes, the preamble of the Constitution does say that, although people will say, well, lawyers will say the preamble really does not, define the Constitution. Basically, the preamble is like an executive summary. But it's important, it's significant, because it says, we, the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God. And here, Almighty God is initial caps A and initial caps G. So it's not Almighty description, it's not God description. It is title, Almighty God. And so, if you're a Christian, Almighty God refers to someone specific, right? Not just anyone, it is someone specific. So, so if you take it from the point of view of someone who is a non-believer, right? It becomes problematic, because when they read the Constitution, they say, wait, look, I'm a Filipino, and I don't believe in this Almighty God, right? So that's why it's a bit complicated. Even though the preamble, many people will say, really does not define the Constitution. But it is part of the Constitution. And Raul, as far as I know, I don't know, I haven't read all the constitutions of every country, but as far as I know, it's probably the only constitution that says that, Almighty God. And maybe related to that, it's also our preamble is the only preamble that has the word love. To establish a regime of love. Kasama yon, no? Kasama yon. Yeah. And so maybe just a very quick history. It really is not surprising because in the framer, some of the framers of the Constitution were priests. There
Yes.
or even pastors. No, there's a bishop was part of that. Bishop Bacani was part of those who framed the Constitution. Father Bernas was among those who framed the Constitution. So there really is some influence there, and also because we are a predominantly Catholic and Christian country, so it may have something to do with that also.
Mm.
And their involvement was legal. Like it's part of the setup. I didn't
Well,
know that.
yes, because they were appointed.
Pointed.
They were
yeah.
appointed in 1986, right after the change in government,
Yeah.
to be part of the Constitutional Commission to write the new constitution. Because what happened there was no time for an election. So President Cory Aquino, appointed 50 people, 50 persons to form a commission to write a new constitution. And among them were bishops, pastors, priests. No, aside from lawyers and scholars, they were these people. No, and so again, it's unsurprising, no, because there were also Muslims who were part of that, and of course the Muslims also recognize an Almighty God. No,
Mhm.
so this is from the point of view of someone who does not believe, for example, someone who says he's an atheist, or someone who says he's an agnostic. How would that strike that person? No, because under the Constitution, I shouldn't be compelled to have a particular religion. So does that mean that I'm being compelled because the preamble says it?
Yeah.
And when I go to
Yes.
court, the court tells me I have to stand up and pray.
Yeah.
So magulo, medyo magulo, masalimuot yung issue.
Yeah. And in a certain way, and allowing that, it opens the door for us to actually say, okay, so belief in God is part of our life as Filipinos. It's a recognition of probably who we are as Filipinos, because I'm presuming that's the reason behind the writing of that preamble. It describes who we are as Filipinos, and belief in God is something that's probably part of us. And it's not even promoting one religion, right? It's just
Right.
accepting
Yes.
the reality that in our country, and that includes our Muslim brothers and sisters, the belief in a God is part of who we are. O nga, challenging nga ito, no?
And
It
yeah, they
adds
can't
to the-
say na parang it's just the Spanish influence in us. Because if you look at the people predated the Spaniards, the Filipinos that were here, they also had a god or gods, right? That they
Yeah.
look, unless I'm mistaken, but through the history class, that's what I remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
So parang,
You're correct. And let me just read from a particular part of a ruling. And again, an interesting ruling by the court. No, this is the case of Inre Valenciano, wherein this person Valenciano complained basically to the court about the holding of a Catholic mass inside the Quezon City Hall of Justice.
Okay.
And so his complaint was, doesn't that violate the separation of church and state? No, because basically his point was, you're using a government building, which is Quezon City Hall or Hall of Justice, and therefore you shouldn't be using public property or public funds in order to have a specific religion's mass. No,
celebration.
and
Yeah.
yeah, because of the separation of church and state. So interestingly, the court ruled on that, and the court basically said, in terms of certain practices of particular faiths, we observe a principle of accommodation, and the court said we recognize that the reality that some measures cannot be imposed on particular peoples or groups of people, for the reason that these measures would be contrary to the religious beliefs. And the court said something about the preamble, no, of the Constitution, which we mentioned earlier. So let me just read very quickly that portion. The court said, when the Filipino people in the preamble of the Constitution implored the aid of divine providence, this is an old case, no, in order to establish a government that shall embody their ideals, conserve and develop the patrimony of the nation, promote the general welfare, they thereby manifested their intense religious nature and placed unfaltering reliance upon Him, capital H, who guides the destinies of men and nations. This is an old case prior to the new constitution. But in relation to the new constitution, the court also said this: the Filipino people, in imploring the aid of Almighty God, manifested their spirituality innate in our nature and consciousness as a people, shaped by tradition and historical experience. Kaya tama yung sinabi ni Raoul at ni Martha, no, na it reflects who we are. No, the Constitution, the framers basically recognize who the sovereign Filipino people are. We are a people who are faithful, and so even though we obey the rule of law, there is a rule of law. The Constitution recognizes that there is the law of God, no, imploring the aid of Almighty God.
First topic pa lang natin for this podcast, and we already have so many thoughts coming in my head, right? But I guess just to sum it up, there, regardless of having Almighty God in our Constitution, you mentioned it's really about there is still separation of church and state. And it's really just saying that it doesn't mean that it's not consistently applied, but you really have to take into consideration where we started from. Like, what's our culture, what's our history as Filipinos. And that really is what dictates the Constitution that we follow now. And what you mentioned, principle of accommodation is, I guess, a pretty big factor in this discussion of separation of law and state, church and state.
Yes, for example, there are holidays that are based on religious practices that are recognized. For example, Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Adha for the Muslim holidays. Then, of course, we have Christmas, right? For example, All Saints' Day, right? November 1. It is a holiday. It is declared as holiday by law. No? And so there are certain religious traditions or religious practices that have become part of the law. Because the law declares them to be such, in a certain sense, it loses its religious nature, no? Because it becomes part of the law. So when we say Christmas is a holiday, it is not so much that only those who believe in Christmas, right, will be part of that holiday, because it is now the law that says Christmas Day is a holiday. Now, if you're not a believer in Christmas, let's say you're a Jew, pwede rin you lobby for, ano nga ba yung holiday ng Jew na kasabay ng Christmas, di ba? There is a holiday, there is a holy day of the Jews that corresponds to Christmas. So pwede rin ganon. But until the law declares it, it is really just a religious practice. But for many religious practices, nagiging batas siya eh. Christmas, for example, Holy Week, for example, di ba? Thursday, Friday are holidays, regular holidays yan. And they have implications on work, they have implications on the economy, they have implications on your benefits if you're a worker. No, kasama yun eh.
So when the state does that, Ted, it's not necessarily disobeying its own sort of parameter of promoting a particular religion, because it's declaring a holiday for the whole country. And then that's why probably it's also accommodating other religions to actually present their, hey, maybe this is also special for us. Can we also have some kind of special recognition? Is that what happens in the government's mind in establishing, for example, the Muslim holidays, which at some point in time it wasn't done, but it's becoming more and more a practice, right?
Yes. Again, some of the older, Christian holidays have become laws way back, no. But you're right, yung mga like Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Adha, those are recent, medyo bago lang yan eh. But basically that's what the law is trying to do. When a law is passed that recognizes a particular faith's tradition or practices as let's say a holiday, no, the law basically says, this is important to the country as a whole, and therefore, let's observe this. So it's not basically saying prescribing a religion. It is basically declaring a particular day to say let's celebrate this, right? And so in a way nagiging nagiging secular, nasa secularize yung holiday, right? Kasi hindi na siya basically religion. Basically, it's saying this is part of the law now. So you have to
Okay.
follow the law, right?
Yeah.
So if you're, it becomes tricky if, let's say, you're an employer and you're not Catholic, you're not Christian, right? And you have to follow the law. Let's say Christmas, hindi ka pwede magpapasok ng tao, otherwise
Yes.
babayaran mo sila ng double kasi may holiday, nagpatrabaho ka. So may effect yun sa'yo. So the question would be, does that not violate my freedom? No?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are tricky, complicated questions that arise out of that issue.
And siguro, I mean, I'll bring this idea, or at least this issue. I mean, we're jumping into probably a new topic, but it's still similar in the truth that, I mean, the state is contending with this reality that, okay, there are several religions in the Philippines, but also the reality that 8 out of 10 Filipinos are Catholic. Okay?
Right.
So there is a tendency, okay, probably the most of all the presidents that we've had are Catholics, or at least one was Protestant, si Fidel Ramos, as based on my recollection. But the tendency, I guess, is, okay, we need to be careful not to make the Catholic religion the state religion, which I think is very clearly something that we talked about, right? But
yes,
how about issues like this? There are many symbols of the Catholic Church in hospitals. I've been to UPPGH. The hospitals there, I mean, the rooms there have crucifix. Isn't that, in a certain way, problematic that we have those symbols all over the Philippines, all over our country, and it happens to be also in certain places, like even some of our streets. So that's also an interesting issue, right? That probably we have to contend with, or we've contended with in our country,
So is it a point of what's that word you used? Adjusting or accommodation? Or does it border on non-establishment of religion?
I think it would depend on what kind of hospital. If you're talking about a private hospital, then it's not an issue, right? It shouldn't be an issue because it's private money, it's owned privately. So a private hospital can say we will put up Catholic symbols, for example, like crucifixes on the rooms. But if it is a public hospital, meaning it is funded by public monies, then it becomes an issue. Because if it's funded by public monies, then the second aspect of the guarantee, the non-establishment, comes in. No? Okay. And so there it becomes tricky, because if you're a public hospital, then all your rooms, for example, have crucifixes, right? Or other religious symbols, or let's say you have icons of Mama Mary in the rooms, and it's a public hospital, then most likely you will get complaints about separation of church and state, because that's public money being funded basically to endorse or encourage or promote a particular religion. So I think the most that can happen here is, for example, like PGH. Well, but PGH is a separate thing because it's a hospital, so it serves a healing function, no? And so of course prayer, faith is accepted as part of healing, no? So connected just a primary purpose. But let's say a public hospital in a province, no, funded by public funds. Tapos that public hospital, for example, all the rooms without exception have crucifixes, lahat. No?
Yes.
Then it becomes a problem because you're basically forced. You're a patient, you're not Catholic, you're forced to be in a room that has crucifixes. Now, maybe the accommodation na pinag-uusapan dito is to say, you have the option of staying in the room na walang crucifix. Okay. Right? If you're not comfortable, or maybe a cross na walang image, no, na walang image of Jesus hanging on the cross, a plain cross, or nothing at all, for example. No? If it's a public hospital, that option should be there para walang compulsion. Because I think the essence of that guarantee is compulsion, napipilitan ka na na pumasok at maniwala kahit na hindi naman yun yung paniniwala mo. And it is funded publicly.
Now,
Even just staring at an empty wall with a cross. I mean, what else will you look at, diba, when you're in a hospital?
Tama,
Yes.
tama.
That's
But I just
true.
remembered,
That's
Ted,
true.
di ba si Congressman Marcoleta ba yun? Yung, naalala mo yung, I mean, most likely you're familiar with that thing that he was proposing, right? I think something similar to his concern about having crucifixes. Can you elaborate on that? I think you're already explaining it a bit, ano? Ano yung kino-complain niya nun?
Basically that. No, I think he had a bill. He filed a bill about that. No, basically he was saying, huwag kayong maghang ng crucifixes in hospitals. Now, again, kailangan lang mag-distinguish, no? That
yes, that's
if,
right.
for example, it is privately owned owned by a private institution, foundation, or even, let's say, by the Catholic Church, because there are hospitals, for example, that are run by the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Then it shouldn't be a problem because you have an option not to go there, or if you go there knowing that it is a hospital run by the Catholic Church, then you expect that there will be crucifixes, right?
Yes.
So, dun sa parteng yon, hindi pwedeng i-regulate ng batas yon, no? Dun sa proposed bill, let's say, ni Congressman Marcoleta. But if he's limiting it to government hospitals, public hospitals, then medyo may reason siya doon to say that. No? At the very least, dapat may option to say, I'm not Catholic, can I just have a room na walang crucifix? No, yung parang ganon. Pag public hospital yon, kailangan yun kasi may public money, because otherwise it might amount to an endorsement of a particular faith.
Yes. Interesting point. From the Catholic Church's point of view, I mean, if you look at the crucifixes are definitely, and many things that Catholic institutions put on their establishments, is just an expression of their identity. But I think behind it is not even something also that I find quite inspiring. Is this? Look at the Daughters of Charity, and many of some of their institutions, especially the ones serving in India, they don't necessarily put crucifixes, but the Catholic Church has always understood that they're doing it because they want to serve those who are in need of healing. No, and many of these hospitals that are run by nuns, their primary role was they established it to actually help those who are sick. And so it happens to just symbol ito, and I'm hearing that more and more they're also being very sensitive, because they definitely are not only taking care of Catholics, they serve the general public. They want to serve everybody who's in need of help. They are more sensitive now. And I know, for example, a Christian, St. Luke's is a Christian institution.
Yes.
But they are now very careful. They sometimes have rooms that don't have any Christian symbol, just to allow people to have the freedom to be more comfortable in the place where they can stay, and that does not necessarily go against their belief. No, this is an interesting discussion. This whole idea of crucifixes and what they symbolize, no more than anything. Yeah. I found that last idea, in a crucifix, and being concerned about us Catholics, about our symbols and where they are placed, and more and more, there is a greater sensitivity among Catholics to be more sensitive to the other religions. There's a lot of interreligious dialogues. Catholics are also becoming more sensitive to other Christian religions, other Christian traditions. No? But I think there's another point. Sometimes we Catholics can center too much on the symbols. They are important, but nowadays Pope Francis has become so popular because he's trying to insist, hey, do something with your life, make a difference, help the poor, be concerned with the environment. He seems to be pushing us Catholics to not only value that, those are definitely who we are, but to go to a deeper part of our identity, and that is how we live our lives. How do we carry our lives? No, sometimes we Filipinos are so bad. We are known to be like split level Christians. We
Yes.
behave differently.
Yeah.
We put the sign of the cross, but then we
Yeah.
act differently. So
Yeah.
so that's not good, right? That the symbols should express also something in terms of how we live our lives. So living our lives as Catholics and expressing it in the way we relate to others is also a very important thing that we should be concerned of as Christians, as Catholics, I guess, no?
Yeah, so on that note of really trying to blend our lives together, if you're Catholic, if we're Christian, um, but we still have a law in our country to abide by. And just going back to our initial discussion about give to give to Caesar what is Caesar's, um, how the ultimate question is really how, right? How can
Yeah.
we do both wherein we're abiding with the laws of Christianity and whatever religion you are part of, but you're also abiding by the laws of your country, and in this case,
Yes.
the Philippine Constitution.
Yeah. And and I'd like to also mention, Martha, the important thing of sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that render to Caesar what to Caesar and render to God what to God's is a idea of they're talking about prayer to offer prayer to God. But what Jesus was actually speaking is not only about prayer, but the way you live your life. That you can look at your life and say, yeah, I mean, I'm living my life trying to do what's right, do what's good, and honesty, for example, fighting for justice, integrity as a Christian is my way of rendering to God what belongs to God. And so you're right. There seems to be an intersection. And I think maybe Ted could elaborate on it because the values of society seem to protect the same things that we should also protect
I
and live
agree.
by.
Yeah.
No? What do you think about that,
Yeah.
Ted? Is there any? Yeah.
You're correct. You're correct, Raul. Actually, and to Martha's point, no, yes, we are, well, we're bound by the laws. No, we are citizens, and so the Constitution applies to us. The laws apply to us. But this is something that maybe a lot of people don't really realize, that many of our laws actually implement values that we agree upon as Christians. For
Mm-hmm.
example, uh, you cannot commit murder. That is a
Mm-hmm.
criminal act. It is
Yeah.
defined by law that you can't kill someone. It is defined as murder. But where does that come from? It comes from, well, the Ten Commandments that says, "Thou shalt not
Yes.
murder, commit murder." No, and
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
value of being a Christian that says, "I value life," and therefore when I commit murder, I should be accountable for that murder, is reflected in the law. And the law
Yeah.
says when someone does this with an intent to kill, then it is defined as murder. No? So
Yeah.
yung ganong klaseng connection, no? And so it's actually something that should be very natural for us when the law
Mm-hmm.
actually coincides with Christian values. But of course, there are times that they don't. No, they don't coincide.
Yes.
No, because
Mm-hmm.
again, the law is written by human beings, and therefore sometimes the values are different. No, and so I think that's the part where we as Christians should do some discernment. No, not to
Yes.
say don't follow the law. No, but to say what does this law actually require us to do. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, uh, uh, many Christians, for example, express a view about the reproductive health law when it
Yes.
first was discussed in
Yes.
Congress before it became a law, and then when it became a law, many Christians actually challenged the law in court,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But while of course the RH law says this is the policy we want. No, this is what we want to address. And there is a state interest that is being protected. But
Yes.
what was the reason for the objection of many Christians, for example, to that law? The the possible violation, for example, of the primacy of life. No,
Yes.
and the compulsion also to do something that would be in violation of what we believe in, right? So
Yes.
that's why many of the Christian groups that challenge the law were focusing on that part. Don't require us to teach something we don't believe in. For
Mhm.
example,
Right.
you're a Catholic hospital, right? You're a Catholic hospital, and the law tells you in this Catholic hospital, because this is the law, you're supposed to tell people to use condoms,
Mhm.
and that's not something your church tells you to do, right?
Mhm.
And so there
Mhm.
should be a religious exception to that that says,
Yes.
if I'm objecting on the basis of my faith, then I should not be penalized. I should not be criminalized. No? So yun yung pinaglalaban noon eh. No, hindi
Yes.
naman outright yung sinasabi na may mamamatay na mga baby through abortion, because abortion remains a crime. But yes, it could lead to that point. No, it could lead to
Yes.
that point. But the main objection really at that point was, you would be requiring people on pain of criminal penalties to basically violate their faith, no, violate
Yes.
what their beliefs tell them they shouldn't do. Even, for example, telling people to use artificial means of contraception, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
would,
Yeah.
for a Catholic, for example, would violate what the church tells, right? So if you're a
Yeah.
doctor and you're placed in that situation, paano ka,
Right.
di ba? You
Oh,
have to follow the
Yes.
law, but you have to follow your faith as well. So yun
exactly.
yung doon nagkakaproblema minsan. So there are
Yes.
times that the values differ, but most of the time naman, the laws are actually intended to uphold certain values that we can all agree on.
Yeah.
But there are times na talagang may divergence. Katulad, for example, nung sa RH. Nagkaroon
Yeah.
talaga ng divergence doon. And that's why many
Yes.
objected to, for example, to the RH law.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the challenge also for us, as I think we mentioned last time, certain things that are part of what we believe in as Christians, and if there's a particular law that is about to enter into our society, and I think there are future discussions that we will have that I
Hmm.
think would fall under that
Yes.
category. What I believe we Christians have to learn is we have to also learn how to explain why we believe what we believe in, and why is it important
That's
for
right.
society to also adhere to certain perspectives. To be concrete, the contraception, if you really think about it, what's so wrong about it? No? But then we don't have time in this episode, but behind it is also a concern, a greater concern for the way we build up family life. No?
Yes.
I don't have time to explain it now, but the point is there should be people, experts, and even people who understand family life who could be able to articulate, our concern. The reason why we're concerned about this upcoming law is because we are concerned about family. And family is important to
Yes.
society. It happens to be important to the Christian faith, but it
Right.
also coincides to the fact that it's also important, should be important to society. And I think we need to learn how to communicate that well, to communicate our Christian values that we believe
I
in
agree.
such a way that it also is seen by others. Yeah, that's a human value. And probably we should be concerned about that also. No? I think that's the challenge that from the side of the
Yeah.
Catholic Church and educators, we need to learn how to engage society in such a way that they can also understand. That's why you're concerned about it. Yes, that's why we're
Right.
concerned
Kaya,
about it.
kaya, kaya
Yeah.
tayo nagpa-podcast, di ba?
Yes.
Kaya
Exactly.
tayo nagpa-podcast.
I think that's the
That's
reason why
why.
we're here.
We ask, we ask the tough questions and we give real answers. No,
Yeah.
That's right. That's
I
right.
mean, we're trying to articulate, hey, what we believe in can make a difference. And we're also encouraging Catholics to understand their faith in such a way that they can also communicate it in a way that
Hmm.
be beneficial to society. No, I think that's
Yes.
it. We shouldn't stop expressing our beliefs and express it in such a way that others would
Exactly.
understand, especially if it will help society. During the RH bill debate, no, and a lot of people were asking, so what's so wrong with contraception? And then, of course, the Catholics who had a particular perspective about it wanted to express, sandali lang, we're concerned about what we call contraceptive mentality. And it's a mentality that could possibly affect the way young people even think about family life. And so that was the main concern of the Catholics. And I
Yeah.
think separation of church and state, it's right for a Catholic to express that, no?
Yeah.
And be able to explain it well and engage in debate with the
Actually, I guess,
society regarding that issue.
yeah, maybe coming from a more youth perspective,
Yeah,
I'm honestly, I'm still very parang RH bill is something that happened and it passed, and I couldn't really grasp my head around
yeah,
where I stand. I mean, of course, I know what the Catholic Church says about it, but whenever, let's say, my dad will bring it up, parang I'm still, I guess, from a youth perspective, we never really got to understand um,
yeah,
how it is, contraception, especially living in, I guess, the country that's very, I don't know, mimics the America's way of partying, I don't know, going
yeah.
out, relating with
Yes.
people, parang ganon. I sometimes I lean towards saying, is it really wrong? I mean, you wanna
Yeah.
be smart about if for us millennials, di ba yung topic is, I can't even
Yeah.
afford to buy a house. Paano na kung
Yes.
magkakaanak ako? Or, di ba? So how does that,
Yeah.
it's still a little mind-boggling to be very honest.
Yeah, Martha, right? And I wish we had another episode just for
I
this,
know.
but we don't. Let me just quickly explain it to you. The concern of the mentality, contraceptive mentality. So, contraceptive mentality means a particular way of thinking because you use contraception all the time. Now, let me just be crude about it and let's be simple, no? Of course, I'm not saying that everybody would end up thinking this way or acting this way. But example, if a bunch of young people keep on just using contraception and using sex as something that okay, I could enjoy sex and not be concerned about it, it could lead to a particular way of thinking. Sex is just for pleasure. But the Catholic perspective is very concerned about the truth that no, sex is something that is meant to be expressed within the context of marriage and to build family. And family is important. We hope that this approach might not produce a particular mentality that I hear from my students, sir, marriage is not a priority to me. Why? I mean, I don't even want to build something. I'm concerned when I hear about that because I end up realizing there are some young people who are not even dreaming of building something. Now, that's the beginning of a mentality that the Catholic Church is concerned about. Now, probably it's too simple, simplistic to say, the contraception will no, but it's
Exactly. Very
John
old
Paul is the
school.
yeah. John Paul II is explaining many of in his teachings. No, no, no. But we are concerned about that mentality because it could pervade society to the point that we don't value anymore the effort of
Right.
coming together to build something like family, which requires a lot of effort from two parties, no?
Yeah.
And we want to promote that. I wish we had more time, but that's the quick answer to why that
Right. Right.
contraceptive mentality can be produced by a simple law on contraception. No,
Right.
did that
It's
make
really
sense to
old.
you, Martha?
Yeah, I mean, definitely helpful. I think
Yeah.
it's really as the more we, as a millennial going to more like adulting, parang ang dami mo nang
Yes.
iniisip kasi, and you know
Mm.
a little bit
Yes.
more, so you take other things into
Yeah.
consideration. So I think that's, as you really forget like where are you rooted, where are you grounded, and that's the
Yeah.
value that I see in the church leaders speaking up. It's just a
Yes.
point now of how can they say it better na hindi siya,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
And the church is also encouraging not only that, but the church is us, right? Remember our
Right, right.
discussion?
Mm.
They want more family people, I mean, parents, husbands, and wives to actually be the ones out there speaking uh, as
Yes.
Catholics regarding this area. Because it's really funny if all we have is the experts and we
Yeah.
don't have experts who also have families. That, and
Oo.
it's the responsibility also of the laity to be able to communicate. We are also concerned about this, no? And so we're learning, and that's why we have a podcast like this, probably to educate each other and to
Yes.
express our ideas as lay people, no. So yun, that's a quick answer to The problem of contraception and that, It's a quick answer. I wish I had more time.
I know. Maybe next episode we'll be able to talk a little bit about that. Actually, just jumping back onto. Oh, sorry. If you wanna go ahead, but just jumping back into separation of church and state, but I think that's a big issue. Where the church stands and where the state stands on Orange Bill. Another big hot topic right now, definitely, would be, and I still stand relatively in the. I don't want to say I still stand relatively in the middle, but I do have questions, and the topic being same-sex marriage. Another long episode.
Yes.
That definitely is not just controversial, but that's very meaty. The discussion on same-sex marriage, not only from the point of the church teaching, but also from the point of law. There are, for example, there have been cases in the United States, for example, that have taken so long before they got to a point where those who advocated, for example, same-sex marriages, were able to claim victory. No? So dito sa Pilipinas, basically nag-uumpisa pa lang eh. No? And so yes, I agree with you. That's something that worth talking about, worth discussing. But maybe not here, not now. Kasi hindi natin kayang tapusin yan.
Oh, so just to wrap up our second episode of our podcast, stay tuned for the next episode where we give a little bit more of a deep dive into same-sex marriage. I'm sure it's a hot topic that people will want to listen to. But just looking at our second episode about separation of church and state, it definitely put more. I think it's really more of how to approach things, diba?
Yeah.
When this certain topic arises that is bordering between, is it separation of church and state or not? It's the mindset of how do we approach this? Let's look at it with the law. What does it say? Does it talk about, is it something that falls under accommodation? Or even for me, I think that was very helpful to know na may accommodation pala sometimes, given different scenarios about if it's private, if it's public, people funded. And then you also look at how the church sees it, what's their perspective, where are they coming from, what's the teaching behind a certain way. And then we can go into so many other things, but I think that basically wraps up our second episode. If you have any takeaways that you want to share as well, another insightful conversation with the two of you. I'm so happy that we're able to do this again.
Yes.
Looking forward to the next episode.
I know.
As you say, same-sex marriages, that's a really huge topic. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of interest in that.
And Ted, the exciting topic that you were mentioning, same-sex marriage, and most likely there's a lot of perspective coming from the Catholic Church and Catholic teachings in that area, Christian teachings in that area. But one of the things that I learned here is in our discussions in this episode is it is the concern of the church and Christians to contribute to the common good. Whatever it is in the discussion, we want to express our belief from the perspective of saying we want to contribute this for the common good. And I think that's the path that we're taking. And hopefully we will discover how church teaching can actually promote the common good in the coming episodes.
All right, so hopefully we'll be able to discuss same-sex marriage again in our succeeding episodes. But in the meantime, we hope you've enjoyed. And if you have any questions that you have for us, feel free to comment them down below on our Facebook page, YouTube, and wherever you listen to podcasts. So if you like this episode, please share it with your friends. Don't forget to follow us on our Facebook page, Lex Dei, and send us your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section down below. So see you on the next episode, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, bye.